Karen Whitmore blocked the only wildfire escape road, then watched from her porch as her neighbors begged for a way out. Cold and controlling, she claimed HOA safety rules gave her the right to shut down an evacuation route. But the sheriff had a power move of his own and made sure she walked that same hill every day for a year. Just wait until you see how justice finally caught up with her. At 3:17 p.m., the sky above Sycamore Hills turned the color of rusted steel. The wildfire that had been creeping along the ridgeline all morning suddenly exploded downhill with a hot wind at its back. Pine needles rained from the air like ash confetti, and the sunlight dimmed under a thick, choking haze. Sheriff's Office emergency alerts lit up phones across the community. The order was clear: evacuate immediately. Most residents didn't waste time. Go bags, pets, loved ones, whatever they could grab, they loaded into their cars and headed toward the one narrow asphalt road that curved down the mountainside. But 2 turns in, the line of cars ground to a stop. At the tightest bend of the route, a white Cadillac Escalade was parked sideways across the pavement, blocking both lanes completely. No cones, no warning. Just a gleaming wall of indifference. Behind the wheel stood Karen Whitmore, the HOA vice president, wearing oversized sunglasses and a sun hat like she was preparing for a garden brunch rather than a wildfire. She stood with folded arms beside her car, unmoved by the chaos she had created. Carol Davidson, a retired teacher who lived 2 houses up the hill, sprinted toward her. Her husband, Rich, relied on a portable oxygen concentrator, and the backup battery was nearly drained. "Karen, for the love of God, we need to get out. Rich can't breathe without power," Carol shouted, tears in her voice. Karen didn't move an inch. "This road is for residents, Carol," she said with a deliberate calm, "not weekend tenants or short-term guests. Maybe you should have read the landscaping bylaws before ignoring shrub height codes." Carol blinked, stunned. The line of cars behind them began honking, briefly at first, then in full blaring desperation. Someone shouted that the fire was now 3 miles out. Someone else swore they could feel the heat coming over the trees. But Karen simply reached into her purse, pulled out a clipboard, and jotted something down. One man tried to edge his truck around the SUV, but the sharp curve and drainage ditch made it impossible. A young mother was sobbing behind the wheel of her minivan, her kids screaming in the back seat. Meanwhile, smoke thickened. The blue sky had vanished entirely, replaced by a sickening copper glow. Helicopters buzzed low overhead, surveying the burn line, and still Karen didn't budge. "This road has been closed due to non-compliant vegetation and unauthorized modifications," she declared. "That includes solar panels on mobile trailers, illegal signage, and most importantly, failure to submit landscape permits. I'm within my rights." 22 vehicles were trapped above her blockade. It took nearly 30 minutes for the sheriff's deputy to reach the scene, after forcing his way up the reverse side on an ATV. When he arrived and assessed the situation, there was no negotiating. The Escalade was towed off the curve by winch, its tires dragging sideways with a screech. Karen protested loudly, citing HOA sovereign rights, but no one listened anymore. By the time the last car made it past the bend, the fire was licking at the edge of the hillside. Flames had already jumped the service trail. 4 homes didn't make it, and every resident knew exactly who had stood between them and safety. The fire was barely out, but Karen Whitmore was already back in control mode. Less than 24 hours after the evacuation chaos, she set up a neighborhood briefing on the manicured lawn behind the Sycamore Hills HOA clubhouse. White folding chairs, linen-covered tables, and a catered fruit tray formed the backdrop, as if the community hadn't just watched part of the hill go up in smoke. Karen sat beneath a striped umbrella, a chilled glass of rosé in one hand and a printed agenda in the other. Only half the community showed up. The rest were either salvaging what they could from scorched foundations, or too furious to be in the same zip code. Karen opened the meeting with a tone-deaf statement. "Yesterday was a tragedy, but not an unexpected one. Several of you failed to follow basic fire mitigation guidelines. Pine needles, uncut grass, unapproved trellises. These things are exactly why we enforce our rules." A collective silence fell over the lawn. You could almost hear the wind shift. Brian Mercer, a 62-year-old volunteer firefighter whose shed, tools, and entire vegetable garden had been swallowed by the fire, stood up. "You blocked the road, Karen," he said. "People could have died. Why?" Karen didn't hesitate. She didn't deny it. In fact, she leaned forward, clasped her hands, and said, "If the HOA had more authority, we wouldn't have had to resort to that kind of measure. I had to act. The community needed order." There was no remorse, no apology, just justification wrapped in HOA bylaws. Around her, shoulders stiffened. People exchanged looks. Some shook their heads and walked away. But Karen continued, reading off a list of proposed policy updates to include tighter landscaping enforcement and more emergency control discretion for HOA board members. Whispers turned to rumors over the next few days. Some said Karen had long targeted Delaney Myers, a disabled widow who lived in a house near the top of the hill. Karen had accused her of operating an illegal short-term rental, though county records showed no such activity. Others believed the blockade had been staged, a power play meant to make a statement about who really ran the neighborhood. None of it seemed implausible anymore. Residents recalled Karen's long history of disputes, ticketing kids for sidewalk chalk, fining a veteran for flying his flag a day early, even threatening to report a retired nurse for hosting her grandchildren during spring break. But this time the stakes had been different. Lives were put at risk, property was lost, and the sheriff's office wasn't treating it as gossip. An official investigation was opened that Friday. Deputies returned to the scene. Fire marshals took measurements. County records were pulled. Karen continued attending HOA functions as if nothing had happened. But behind her back, the temperature was rising. Even in a town used to wildfires, this kind of blaze had started something else. An anger no rain could put out. It started with a permit search. While the fire marshals combed through damage reports, the county engineer's office quietly reviewed land use records for the evacuation route, specifically the stretch Karen had blocked. What they found was deeply disturbing. There had been no permit issued for any obstruction, temporary or otherwise. And yet, weeks before the fire, retractable steel bollards had been embedded directly into the pavement at that very curve. The bollards weren't obvious. They had been camouflaged beneath decorative planter beds and hidden in a pattern of freshly laid pavers. But they were there, positioned perfectly to rise and lower on command. A week into the investigation, a contractor came forward. His statement was clear. "Mrs. Whitmore hired us under the label of landscape beautification, but she was very specific about the timing system. She wanted those posts to pop up every night at 9 p.m. and stay raised unless manually overridden." He even handed over emails in which Karen instructed him to install a backup battery and assured him that this path falls under HOA grounds enforcement. But that was a lie. The county engineer confirmed that the road in question wasn't under HOA control. It was a designated emergency fire access route. By law, it belonged to the sheriff's office and had been on the official wildfire evacuation map for over a decade. The moment that confirmation hit the sheriff's desk, things escalated fast. Sheriff Owen Caldwell himself rode up the hill with 2 deputies and a county safety inspector. The mood was quiet but heavy. Neighbors watched from porches and driveways as the group walked the curve, took photos, and inspected the ground. Karen came out in a crisp blazer, clutching a binder of bylaws and citations she had printed from the HOA's internal site. She didn't deny anything. When confronted, she claimed she had installed the posts to protect the community from reckless cut-through traffic and enforce neighborhood safety standards. But video evidence had already surfaced. Several residents had submitted doorbell footage and dash cam clips from the day of the fire. One angle showed Karen reclining on her porch with a glass in hand, watching the chaos unfold while neighbors banged on her SUV's windows, pleading with her to move it. The most damning clip captured 2 elderly residents, Tom and Marjorie Lyles, being pulled from their home by firefighters in a last-minute aerial rescue. They hadn't been able to get past the blockade, Marjorie made it. Tom didn't. He passed from smoke-related complications the next morning. That night, someone crept up to Karen's property wall with a can of red spray paint. Across the stone, in uneven, furious letters, they wrote, "Murder by HOA." The paint was gone by morning, scrubbed off by Karen's landscaper before sunrise. But the photo had already gone viral in the local Facebook group. And something irreversible had shifted in Sycamore Hills. This wasn't a zoning dispute anymore. This was personal. Exactly 7 days after the investigation concluded, Sheriff Owen Caldwell signed an emergency executive order, something rarely invoked, and only under the most serious threat to public safety. Under the Emergency Municipal Risk Ordinance, Karen Whitmore's driveway was officially reclassified as a restricted hazard zone. The county installed 2 heavy-duty iron gates, one at the foot of the slope and one at the top. Both were locked, chained, and monitored. For the next 12 months, Karen would have no vehicular access to her home. The slope stretched nearly 800 yards uphill, steep and exposed to the elements. There were no shortcuts, no allowances. If she wanted to reach her door, she had to walk. But the local news stations were the first to arrive. Drones hovered overhead, capturing footage of Karen in tennis shoes and slacks, slowly trudging up the hill in the early morning light. Reporters called it a rare and symbolic measure of municipal accountability. Karen called it abuse of power and vowed to sue. Sheriff Caldwell didn't flinch. "You block a fire lane, you risk lives," he said plainly at the press conference. "You walk the hill until you understand what you did." The consequences didn't stop there. The county filed a negligence claim against the HOA, citing systemic failure to manage safety protocols and illegal encroachment on county-managed land. Fines were issued, policies were reviewed. At an emergency board meeting held 2 nights later, standing room only, Karen was officially voted out by a unanimous decision. She didn't even attend. In her place, the board extended a seat to Delaney Myers, the same neighbor Karen had harassed for months. Delaney, soft-spoken and practical, accepted on one condition: that a portion of the HOA's rebuilding funds go directly to fire preparedness and accessibility upgrades. Meanwhile, the hill began to heal. Where blackened stumps once stood, clusters of wildflowers pushed up through the soil, brilliant orange, yellow, and violet. Kids returned to the newly cleared park, riding bikes and planting memorial stones. Neighbors started hosting backyard cookouts again, the tension no longer hanging in the air. And every morning, like clockwork, Karen could be seen making the long walk up the hill alone, past the same spot she had once blocked with her Escalade. The sign posted by the county at the bottom didn't need explanation. Just 6 words, framed in clean white. "This is what justice looks like." No one ever removed it.